Normally in boxing, it's a better idea to go with the guy who has the better recent form. Not always, but generally, it's the better thing to do in my experience. And so I'm leaning towards Daniel Dubois in the fight. So Daniel Dubois stops Filip Hrgovic on cuts in the 8th round to become IBF interim heavyweight champion. Despite Hrgovic being unbeaten going in, I was actually leaning more towards Daniel Dubois in this bout, based mainly on recent form. This fight was somewhat reminiscent of Lennox Lewis versus Vitaly Klitschko. Obviously, Dubois and Hrgovic aren't as good as those guys, but the fight played out in similar fashion. Hrgovic in the role of Klitschko was the taller of the two, and he started much better, threatening to embarrass Dubois in the early going. He was absolutely spamming the right hand in the first 2 rounds of the bout, literally couldn't miss with it. He obviously fancied that he could get an early stoppage and threw caution to the wind with no regards for pacing himself. Dubois did look buzzed once or twice, but for the most part, he took the shots very, very well. Like Lennox Lewis against Vitaly Klitschko, it was Dubois' aggression behind a very heavy jab which eventually gained him a foothold in the fight. He was forcing the pace, starting to land his own big shots, and managed to cut Filip Hrgovic eventually over both eyes. Hrgovic expended a tremendous amount of energy in the first 4 rounds of the fight going for the knockout, and it backfired because by the 5th round, not only did he have blood running into both his eyes, impairing his vision, but he was also tired, and Dubois was only just getting started. Hrgovic took some massive punches in the 7th, but once again showed to have an extremely tough chin. No one has stood up to Zhilei Zhang's punches as well as Filip Hrgovic did, because he got hit with loads of flush shots in that fight. Never mind the first round knockdown that wasn't really a knockdown. He took much harder shots than that later on in the fight against Zhang, bang on the chin, and didn't go down. And similarly in this fight, I don't think anyone has ever stood up to Dubois' punches this well. Not even Joe Joyce, because Joyce really didn't get hit clean by Daniel Dubois very often. So Hrgovic is teak tough, but his punch output was dropping off dramatically while Daniel Dubois was increasing, and Hrgovic had blood running into his eyes so he couldn't see. That scenario is obviously very dangerous, so the referee decided to stop the fight on the advice of the doctor in the 8th round. Again, shades of Lewis Klitschko. Now this fight revealed several things to me. First of all, Daniel Dubois needs the support of his dad at ringside. He needs to hear the sound of his dad's voice constantly in his ear. He relies on that. It reassures him. Dubois has a childlike personality, and just like many kids who box, they need their dad to be right there with them in order to feel confident and brave. Dubois seemed to be listening more to his dad, who is shouting instructions from the outside of the ropes, than he was to his actual trainer Don Charles in the corner. Now, Daniel Dubois briefly trained with Mark Tibbs, but as I understand it, their relationship didn't work out because Tibbs felt that Dubois' dad was interfering too much. But Don Charles is so desperate to have a world champion, a heavyweight champion in particular, that he's willing to tolerate that type of interference. With that being said, I actually think that Dubois' dad was giving his son better advice in the Jarrell Miller fight than Don Charles was. His dad was telling him to stand his ground and bang it out more, whereas Don Charles was telling him to move non-stop. Dubois didn't gain control of that fight until he stood his ground and started to bang it out more. Now, it's a strange setup that they've got there. Seems very chaotic. In most instances, it's a recipe for disaster. But it actually seems to be working for Daniel Dubois at the moment because his past 2 performances have been the best of his career. Dubois has a ton of youthful energy. He's physically strong. He's highly aggressive. He's willing to run red lights and take risks in order to get his shots off. He's got a very solid jab. His feet are actually faster than they look. He bounces in and out of range quite well. He hits hard. His chin is fairly decent. I'll speak more about that later. And he's got a high work rate, which he can now sustain for the whole duration of a fight. We saw it against Jarrell Miller. Couldn't do it against Alexander Usyk, but Usyk is very special. Against most heavyweights, Dubois is going to be the one with the better work rate and the better gas tank. And that's a great asset to have. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still loads to improve on. Dubois' defense was pretty horrible against Hrgovic. He's still very stiff. There's no upper body movement at all. He couldn't get out of the way of Hrgovic's right hand. His guard is very open. He fights with his elbows flared out rather than tucked in against his body. So as I say, there's still plenty to address there. Now, as for Filip Hrgovic, he disguises his right hand very well. There's very little tell on the punch, and he throws it in this downhill chopping type of fashion. Again, it's very reminiscent of Vitaly Klitschko. Hrgovic is like a lesser version of Vitaly Klitschko Klitschko in many ways, both stylistically in the way he holds his left hand low, leans back from punches and chops down with the right hand, in terms of his physical attributes, being tall and having a very good chin, but also in terms of his personality, because like Vitaly Klitschko, Hrgovic has a confidence about him which borders on arrogance. Another similarity he has with Vitaly Klitschko, which isn't so great, however, is in the lack of one-punch knockout power. Despite having a very high KO ratio, Vitaly Klitschko was never a massive puncher. He had above average power, but nothing special. But over the years, he mastered the art of hitting and not getting hit. And in doing so, he'd wear his opponents down gradually by constantly chopping away at them while avoiding being hit in return, which demoralizes them. The Chris Arreola fight was a perfect example of this, right? I think we now have to conclude that Hrgovic does not have great punching power either, because he hit Daniel Dubois with a ton of flush right hands and nothing happened. And this is a guy who's been down several times in his career. Now, some people are questioning Hrgovic's conditioning as well. Personally, I don't think his conditioning is that bad. I think he just doesn't pace himself very well. He basically punched himself out early in this fight. If we have a look at the CompuBox numbers here, you'll see what I'm talking about. As you can see in round one, Filip Hrgovic threw 66 punches compared to 48 for Daniel Dubois. He landed 15 compared to 12 for Dubois. But crucially, 13 of the 15 shots that Hrgovic landed in the first round were power punches. That right hand he was hitting Dubois with. In stark contrast, only 5 of Dubois' 12 punches landed in round one were power shots. The vast majority of them were jabs. Power punches are far more energy sapping to throw than jabs are. So think about that. Hrgovic comes out throwing loads of power punches at Daniel Dubois in the first round, throws even more in the second round. This is where it really gets crazy. Have a look at the punch total for Filip Hrgovic in round two. He threw 80 punches in that round. 80 punches, in case you didn't know, is a massive amount for a heavyweight to throw, especially a heavyweight of this size. 250 pounds, there or thereabouts. And 50 of them were power shots. People, that's crazy. In contrast, Dubois threw about half as many punches in round two. He threw 45 and landed 19. So this punch output from Filip Hrgovic was unsustainable. He obviously felt as though he could get Dubois out early. He took a gamble on that and it backfired. He punched himself out, basically. When you look at Dubois' punch output from round to round, it's very steady, it's very stable. So he threw 48 in round one, 45 in round two, 51 in round three, 48 in round four, 44 in round five, 38 in round six, 55 in round seven. Compare that to Hrgovic, 66 in round one, 80 in round two, 67 in round three, 66 in round four, 53 in round five, 50 in round six, 14 in round seven, and 6 in round 8. That's obviously the round the fight ended. And Hrgovic's connect percentage obviously was going down. He connected with 15 in round 1, 26 in round 2, 15 in round 3, 14 in round 4, 10 in round 5, 11 in round 6, 3 in round 7, and just 2 in round 8, which obviously wasn't a completed round. So the CompuBox numbers really tell you the story of not only the fight, but why Filip Hrgovic slowed down so badly. Because he came out the gate throwing an absolute ton of power shots. They didn't have the desired effect, i.e. knocking Dubois out or hurting him sufficiently to stop him being so aggressive. In fact, they only seemed to spur Daniel Dubois on. And obviously Dubois managed to cut Hrgovic. Hrgovic's gas tank was depleted after throwing all those shots. And by round 7, he'd become a punching bag for Daniel Dubois. I mean, don't get it twisted. It was a competitive fight while it lasted, at least for the first 4 rounds or so. But Dubois was certainly in the ascendancy. Hrgovic was clearly fading, and he had those cuts, which were impairing his vision and making it even easier for Dubois to hit him. So this is something that Hrgovic doesn't have in common with Vitaly Klitschko, and something that he should be looking to learn from Klitschko, how to pace himself properly. Another issue for Hrgovic is that he clearly has a problem with overconfidence. He was contemptuous of Zhilei Zhang going into their fight, didn't learn his lesson from that, that, and he was even more contemptuous of Daniel Dubois going into this fight. He acted like it would be a walk in the park. I also don't like Ronnie Shields as his trainer. Don't rate him, never have. It's a shame that Fritz Zadunek, Vitaly Klitschko's old trainer, isn't still alive because he'd be ideal. That style I think is perfect for Hrgovic. It might not be the most fan-friendly style, but I think it suits Hrgovic's attributes. I don't think training in America is doing him any favors with the jet lag and what have you. Some fighters handle it better than others. In my view, you really need to be training in the country where your fight is going to be. If not, then at least the country where the time zone isn't that different. Anyway, it's Hrgovic's first loss. I think he can come again. He just needs to sort his mindset out, tone the arrogance down a bit, not too much, just a little bit in order to facilitate learning. He needs to understand that he doesn't know it all, and also get rid of Ronnie Shields. Maybe hook up with Jonathan Banks and James Ali Bashir, or perhaps even Sugar Hill. I wouldn't rule that out. For Daniel Dubois, next stop looks like Anthony Joshua, and I've made a separate video about that. For now, let me know what you guys think about all the points I've raised in this video in the comments section below.